So consensus claims that it's out of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and somehow it gets through Eurasia, populating Eurasia, and it gets into the Americas until South America. First of all, this is a very big stretch to do over land. It's, in my opinion, unrealistic, improbable. But anyhow, that's what consensus claims. And we have as a remark that the supposed ancestor, starting here, Y-DNA Adam, 50,000 Sand people, haplogroup A, spreads out of Africa, and there's no sign of this at all. There's no sign of it at all. There's no sign of it at all. It spreads to Americas, and they prepare for us to make it look smooth. 3, Y-DNA Adam, that is the star in West Africa. And then nicely A, B, C, D, E. And you see that they adapted here, and that is they exchanged later after naming all these haplogroups. They obviously exchanged the C, they took it from here and put it here. And so DE comes in its place. And I guess they do this because C is really very distant from Africa. And it doesn't make sense because you cannot reach Australia, which always was an isolated continent, by walking to it. Nor can you realistically walk to Beringia, because this is all permafrost. This is all deadly. Imagine out of Africans walking thousands of kilometers across permafrost. It's all permafrost. It's extremely deadly. It doesn't make sense at all. And they are not following some prey because that prey would die. Further, there's no archaeological evidence at all. And you can find the mammoth tusks here. They were never used or only temporarily used by a very limited number of people, because you can see them appear here while the permafrost is melting. Anyhow, in this tree, consensus makes it look very smooth. So it's from A to B to D to C, even while the C is in Australia and in North America. So here A, B, D, E, C. And D is not African, but that's for later. B is not African. And most probably, but it doesn't even matter, A is not African. It's also, all of them are out of Americas, just like the ancestor markers point out. So we get that C, and then consensus kind of makes up the group haplogroup F, and that is to make the transition from this block, the supposed block, to this supposed block, G, H, I, G, K, and then get to another hypothetical group, because if you look it up, you won't find a map like you see here and in this series of videos. So virtual group equal to K, and there you have LP and O, MS, P, and P is the supposed origin of Q and R just at the end to explain the Q over here. And so probably they point it out to somewhere here, but there is no It's P, supposedly P, that gives rise to Q and R, but there's no P. There's no P. It is all virtual groups to make up a smooth transition from block to block. In fact, this is a new transition, and it doesn't exist. You won't find it over here. So the tree, as it is written out by consensus, looks very smooth from A to Z, so to speak, with Q at the end, at the tail, nicely at the tail. In fact, it's not, because R is younger than Q. But you can ask the question, if it gets here, why does it also at the same time or later arrives in Europe and Western Eurasia and makes up all these modern humans that at some point kind of conquers the world, because they will around 1500, mostly Spanish and Portuguese and later others, they will expand to, they will conquer, not really expand, but also expand all over the Americas. But anyhow, they should not come at the end, but for consensus, this P must be somewhere here, but it's not here. There's no evidence of it, but that is to make it fit. So Q from P, and from the theoretized P that you cannot find, Q goes here and populates the Americas, and R plays over here and other places in the world, which is more difficult to understand. But that doesn't seem to be a problem, because at least this tree is very smooth, A to Z, so to speak. So while the tree is very smooth, A to Z, the reality is all except smooth. Here you have the A, here you have Adam, and then you have one group after the other. That doesn't make sense. And it's only here that it starts to become homogeneous. But nobody seems to care that it doesn't make sense. So we claim that all these groups come from expansions from the thriving Amazon forest Americas, that they follow the Austronesian expansion, and that while they thrive, they produce hybrids, and those hybrids go to each to their own space. And I would like to show you one example that demonstrates quite well. So we first want to show a river that we claim that will be used to populate, let's say, the Tibetan Plateau with a certain haplogroup. So all this was Sundaland in the Ice Ages. So if you would want to navigate, you would have to round it and find your way following one of the rivers that is available. In this case, we will focus on Irrawaddy, that is in Myanmar, former Burma, and you have other important rivers like Yangtze, Mekong, etc. But we will focus on this one, because we claim that the Americans, with one of their hybrids, delivered this group to more or less this region. To what region? After rounding Sundaland, navigating between Sahu and Sundaland, navigating in between, following the coast in the ice ages with lower sea levels, and entering the Irrawaddy River and populating Tibetan Plateau and some other regions, but But this is one of the main entrances, and one of the in-between steps is the Andaman Islands, which also have high concentration of haplogroup B. So we're talking about haplogroup B, Y-DNA haplogroup B. It crosses the Americas through the Pacific currents, which are very strong, uh, pass between the ships, the fleets, pass between Saru and Sundaland, round Sundaland, leave descendants on this island, which is not an island at the time. They, let's say, the haplogroup B itself, isolated on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and they are still in high concentrations in Tibet. Uh, Another part also came to the Pacific Current and installed itself in Japan, also high concentrations, and entered through the rivers again to this region, which is much bigger, and they must have had other entrances, or they spread afterwards because they stretch from the Black Sea, which is important, at least in European history. Caspian, we will find out later that Yamnaya, or the steppe ancestry, is important here and spreads to the rest of Europe and Western Eurasia. So in some way we already see the importance of the Americans arriving, delivering B, and more or less similarly, and in some way a descendant of B, will be delivered much later by other routes, not anymore by this route, or much less importantly, and not to Europe, but that's for later. So rounding Sundaland with the navigation, entering the Irrawaddy River and populating the Tibetan Plateau, more or less here, I suspect, is the Altai Mountains, but especially noteworthy is Japan. And you have very old groups here. You have black descendants here, and you have the Jomon over here, which is the first, or one of the first populations of Japan. So in some way, history will repeat, only the routes will change over time. For a very long period during the ice ages, the Austronesian expansion will deliver, and this is the delivery of D, but other groups will also be delivered later. O, which is a dominant haplogroup, R will be delivered, haplogroup R, which is the most dominant haplogroup amongst modern Europeans. Modern humans will be delivered to Australia and to more or less to this region. They most probably are delivered through the Pacific and the Austronesian expansion. And E, which follows D, which follows these, will be delivered later in, well, much of Africa. It's E, the descendant of D, or the follower up of D, is the main haplogroup in Africa, but it's not from Africa. It's not D or E or DE are not African. That doesn't make sense. It's very early in the alphabet, in the tree, in the smooth consensus tree, but it's not coming from Africa. It's quite obvious that it starts to be, because all will present the same pattern. I just did D. This will be the case for H. Will be the case for O, and they all will follow rivers. So it has to do with navigation. It has not to do with going by foot